What's up, everybody? Welcome to the post-draft episode of the 5280 podcast on the MHRT network. I am your host, Mundungus Creevy, alongside with my co-hosts, as always, Cameron Parker, Gage Madrid, and Glenn Hauser. What's going on, guys?
What up? Finally, we have something solid to talk about.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that could be. Now, if you could please do us all a favor and go on to the YouTube channel and hit the subscribe button for the MHRT network. We're trying to get to 1,400. Gage has been pushing on Broncos Syndicate because they just hit 3,000. Way to go, Gage. That is an awesome achievement.
Awesome, dude. Thank you.
So if you would not mind going over to the MHRT network YouTube page, hit that subscribe button, would be greatly appreciated. And it's free, and it's easy, and it's quick. We'd greatly appreciate it.
We got to give a shout out to Gage since we just mentioned that. I mean, he live streamed all 3 days of the draft by himself.
Yeah.
Good luck, Big Mike. But Gage, I don't know how you did it. That was something spectacular, man.
It's a marathon, man. Second year in a row I've done it. It's an absolute grind. But I love it. It's so much fun. Get to interact with the chat. The chat was great during the entire thing. They kept it lively. They kept it fresh. And there wasn't without its fair share of NFL teams making some big surprises that made it quite an entertaining stream. You guys should have seen my reaction to the Michael Penix pick.
I did. It was funny. But listen, we might as well just get into it because honestly, that pick messed up a couple things, right? Like we saw the Sean Payton interview after the first round, and the way that it was all set up was you got the first three quarterbacks coming off the board. You got the Giants, which are the
mystery team, Joker, if you will.
Right,
yeah,
they called them the Jokers with the waiting to see what they do if they take a quarterback. If they take a quarterback, then you move up to get the one you want. If they don't, then by all accounts, it is the Vikings taking McCarthy, Denver taking Nix, and the Raiders taking Penix.
Yeah.
Fuck you, Falcons, basically is what happened. Once you got past that, like the Falcons just took Penix, which surprised everyone.
Yeah.
And that made Sean Payton kind of play a fun little game with the Vikings to get them to move up. But then the Broncos had to make sure they stayed in front of the Raiders to get Nix because now they didn't have the option to get Penix.
Yeah, it threw everything out of whack, really. And, and just strictly from the Falcons' point of view, you had the opportunity to take a Dallas Turner, a Jared Verse, you had a chance to take an edge rusher, and you didn't. You decided to take a luxury pick, right? You kind of really went luxury, truly, and you went with Michael Penix. And this is where, look, I mean, this is a conversation. Well, I will be completely honest. I don't mind the fit overall. Just if you're looking at the Penix fit in Atlanta, like from a future, if you will, for Penix and maybe that offense. Really, if Kirk Cousins wasn't there, I don't mind it. But like that's the thing. Kirk Cousins is there, and you talked about some of the people that were upset. Well, guess who happened to be one of those people who was upset? Mike McCartney, and Kirk Cousins were a bit perplexed by the move, in terms of drafting Penix. And look, I understand the succession plan. I understand the succession plan idea, but not that high. And if we are going to critique this whole age idea of all the quarterbacks in this class, that would be the one that you would want to solely focus on, because you drafted a player who is, roughly the same age as Bo Nix, and we'll get to Bo Nix here in just a little bit. But is your idea to sit him for 4 or 5 years? Because at that point, the moment that Kirk Cousins is out that door, you're talking about a guy who's, rather close to 30 years old. It just makes zero sense whatsoever. If he was maybe in the second round, if he was maybe in the third round, cool. We'll have that conversation. But no, we decided to have this conversation immediately, after that 8th pick.
Yep. And with the Falcons, man, it's crazy because if they wanted to go with the avenue of a succession plan, you take J.J. McCarthy, who's 21 years old, who can sit behind Kirk Cousins for the next 4 years. And by the time he would have taken over, he would have been the same age as Michael Penix is right now. Penix will take over when he's 28 years old, something like
30.
that. Yeah. There's no logic behind this pick besides the fact that Raheem Morris liked Michael Penix. There was literally a clip of Terry Fontenot explaining the decision of this pick to Arthur Blank. It was quite animated, and it looked like Arthur Blank wanted none of it. This is a decision that's going to most likely lead to the firing of the entire Falcons regime at the end of this season if their defense struggles. They still have not addressed edge rusher adequately. And then they freaking made an even bigger mistake, in my opinion, in the second round by drafting Rook Ahoro ahead of Johnny Newton, who was one of the highest rated players that was still on the board. They fumbled it not once, but twice. Or I should say they falconed it not once, but twice. Absolutely ridiculous. If you're going to have a succession plan in place, you do it with the 21-year-old quarterback. But even then, the decision to draft a quarterback and sign Kirk Cousins are not mutually exclusive. It's all one decision. You're either going to sign Kirk Cousins or you draft a damn quarterback. You don't do both. You just don't. Now, all you've accomplished is you've pissed off Kirk Cousins and you've put Michael Penix Jr. to disadvantage. He's getting hate all throughout fans and the media because of this crap. And it's not his fault. He doesn't deserve this. This is squarely on the Atlanta Falcons for, I'm just going to call it for what it is. They are fucking stupid.
Yeah.
Now, hold on. Before we go to Glenn, I want like Big Mike, I'm going to send you a waiver so that if you fail this law final, it's not on us. Okay. I just wanted to point that out.
A teacher slip.
The show is yours.
That's right.
So what I was going to say is, like we're not the complaints shouldn't be about Penix, and I think most of them are just about the action itself, the decision itself. Because the guy, I mean, he's somebody that I think is going to have a spectacular career, but I feel sorry for him. I mean, now he's stymied a little bit while he's going to look at some of his cohorts that are going to get these opportunities the next year, the season and beyond. And what's crazy about it is that there were so many offensive players, the largest start to a draft of offensive picks in the history of the NFL draft. So essentially with the Falcons needing defense, they essentially had the first pick in the NFL draft and they botched it. It's just absolutely nuts. And then you look at somebody like the New Orleans Saints, who later on took a Spencer Rattler, as a succession plan, and that's perfect. They have a high-priced quarterback, Derek Carr, but now they have a younger guy that's going to be ready to take over. But they didn't waste a top 10 choice. It's absolutely stunning. But I'm just glad that we got our guy at 12.
Yeah.
And I kind of want to play devil's advocate just a little bit, just to get both sides. I do. So if you're looking at this strictly from what is going to happen in the future, I somewhat understand the pick, right? Like if you're picking Michael Penix not for this year, you're picking it for the future. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the guarantees for Kirk Cousins last for the first 2 years, and then there's no guarantees after that. So they technically have an out after 2 years.
That's 2 years, Mike, and $100 million.
No, I know, but like falling in love with Penix and knowing that if you don't get him at 8, he's going to be gone at 13, I can somewhat understand it. However, there are times where you just need to wait and get a player that you need at a position next year. This would have been one of those times.
Yeah.
They nobody was ever saying that Michael Penix was going to be at 8. So they didn't need to, I mean, just doing the classic rewind, they didn't need to actually sign Kirk Cousins in the first place. They could have been guaranteed Michael Penix at that point if they were so in love with him. Part of, I'm guessing, Arthur Blank's retort to Fontenot had to have been a reminder that you just came to me for a $180 million contract over 4 years for this guy. And then all of a sudden now we're coming back and let's not forget what division that they're in as well. I mean,
Right.
a very winnable division if you have any level of talent, and they really wasted an opportunity to get their first, rushing star since, say, like John Abraham or Vic Beasley. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, and
Yeah, that's why I'm sorry. That's
No.
why I'm kind of going with I understand the decision, but it doesn't mean it was the right decision.
Yeah, or that it was just solely the wrong decision. I may talk yourself into it, but doesn't necessarily make it the right
Understanding
decision.
the thought process, but
Yeah.
not agreeing.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to take a quarterback, take the 21-year-old, not the 24-year-old.
Well, and I think the thing is like if you're talking yourself into a Jordan Love situation, that's fine, right? But again, still, you're talking yourself into a situation where you're drafting a 23, 24-year-old quarterback, and so that's why I thought it's going to be a little bit interesting to see how, teams operate the quarterback, conundrum this year in the draft. And I think that, it's going to be I think it's going to be a really fun conversation to have in terms of the quarterback class. I'm sure we'll have that conversation actually, here, but when you talk about environment, and you talk about place and you talk about coaching, I mean, I would be very remiss if you don't talk about, some of the two other quarterbacks that were the last two of those six that were taken after Penix that were actually in maybe much more favorable situations than maybe any of those quarterbacks that are drafted ahead of them. And so I think that, I think it's very real that not only, again, did you draft his future replacement, but you also possibly even stunted the idea of growing Michael Penix even more.
Yep.
So I kind of want to go into our draft picks. Obviously, the biggest one is going to be our first round pick. And I have a couple questions regarding that, and then we can kind of move on and break down the other draft picks where we see them fit. Obviously, we took Bo Nix at 12, the quarterback that we've been talking about. There was a lot of debate between McCarthy or Nix. It looks like the Broncos had Bo Nix as the third best quarterback in the draft on their list. So McCarthy wasn't even in the conversation before Nix, which is fine, I guess. But looking at it on paper, Bo Nix is a great fit for what Sean Payton likes to do. So my question then becomes, I have two questions. One, what did you think of the Bo Nix pick? And two, does that mean that Zach Wilson is the backup? And what are we doing with Stidham?
I'm very curious to see overall what it would mean. I think if you're going to be looking solely at a training camp battle, that's where you'll find your answer between Zach Wilson and Jarrett Stidham. Between who's going to win that backup quarterback battle. I don't know that answer, right? I truly don't know that answer, but I think that because you gave Stidham a fair amount of money to be the backup, and so I think it's fair to assume that he would be your guy. But you also have about $5 more million, if you will, attached to Zach Wilson. So I think it's at least fair to have that kind of debate. And of course, he's a former a top 5 pick, right? I mean, so like there's development there that maybe you could certainly see, and we certainly saw it in. It's kind of fun to have the conversation, but Sam Darnold with San Francisco, a former New York Jets quarterback, but there was that conversation to be had with Trey Lance and Sam Darnold in San Francisco, and the 49ers made the curious decision to ship away Trey Lance to Dallas, making Sam Darnold, the backup to Brock Purdy. And so I mean, granted, you won't necessarily maybe the same concerns for like a or a Brock Purdy and Darnold competition, right? But you'll at least have a backup there. I think this just overall, it was a very smart decision. It was a very smart decision, I feel like, for the Broncos to really not lose sight of the fact that this was their guy, right? And I think that the moment the Atlanta Falcons made that selection of Michael Penix, I'll be honest, I think also too, Sean Payton probably had that Patrick Mahomes PTSD at that moment, in terms of him losing out on his quarterback. And that's when he started, working the idea of, oh, we actually are interested in JJ McCarthy when we're really not interested in JJ McCarthy, to get the Vikings to be a little bit more aggressive and jump the Broncos, when in reality it was Bo Nix all along. And he's a perfect fit. He is a seamless fit. I mean, you can go and listen to every single analyst. We mentioned it numerous times before, and go out and listen to them, whether it's an analyst, a former quarterback. They absolutely loved the idea. Sean Payton didn't, but he absolutely loved the idea of Nix in Denver. So go listen to Chase Daniel, right? He's the number one Chargers fan. Bell.
Just had to throw that out there.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, go.
Sorry, Bill.
Go listen to. Go listen.
It'll be seen a lot more tonight. Just wait.
Yeah. Go listen to Chase Daniel, the former quarterback. Right, go listen to Chase Daniel. Go listen to Robert Griffin III's interview with Bo Nix. Go listen to Greg Cosell and Doug Farrar's interview, and sit down with Bo Nix, and go even listen to maybe Kay Adams. Go listen to maybe even what Colin Cowherd has even said about Peter Schrager. Joe Klatt is another one. Joe Klatt has actually been maybe one of the more big proponents of them even actually taking him at 12. Right. So, I mean, he is a huge proponent of them even taking him at 12. And I think that the fact that they really didn't screw the pooch on it, I think is really the biggest thing. They drafted their guy. At the end of the day, that's all that mattered. And they went down and they decided to build their entire class off of that.
Yep.
And
what I wanted to do from the get-go.
Right.
Sorry, go on.
And it was so clear that the Broncos didn't want JJ McCarthy once you saw the compensation and how the Jets didn't get very much from Minnesota in order to move up. I think it was like a 5 and a 6. So It's like, all right, whatever it would have taken to go one more step was not going to be out of the Broncos' reach if they really wanted JJ. So at that point, it was pretty clear that was a smokescreen all along, because they could have made a deal for that positioning. But it's not a reach if it works out, and I think we really have a guy that could thrive under a Sean Payton. And to the question about the backup, it's interesting because right now we're all kind of considering that Stidham would perhaps be third, and he's the only one that has ever run a play in this system. So it's very interesting. And Bill did mention that the Broncos informed Zach Wilson they won't pick up the 5th-year option. Not a surprise at all. That's somewhere in the neighborhood of $22 million. There's zero chance that was going to happen.
Yep.
Thanks, Boggins.
We agree.
We'll see how Washington does this year with all their good players gone.
Also, Boggins, thanks for the athletic director.
Go Buffs.
Okay, so with the history the Broncos have at quarterback, and I'm not saying this will happen, but
recent history or past history?
Both, recent and past. Should the fans not expect Nix to start and sit and learn?
No. Okay. Bo Nix has already played a crap ton of football. He's played over 60 college football games. He's ready. He's taken snaps from under center before. I don't know if he's used a pre-snap cadence before, but he's probably already learning how Sean Payton wants his cadences. Sean Payton probably has like 10, 15 different cadences that he wants his quarterbacks to use. Russell Wilson could only use like 3 or 4 of them last year. For whatever given reason, a veteran quarterback couldn't mix up his damn cadence. Sean Payton was complaining about that in press conferences. So it's little stuff like that that a young quarterback normally would have to have a learning curve for. I think Bo Nix is already ahead of the curve from taking snaps under center, identifying the Mike linebacker, changing the run fit to the line of scrimmage, just little stuff like that. Bo Nix did all that in college. He's not going to have to learn that. That's why I think he's ready to go.
Yeah.
Engage. What about Forsyth as the center?
Yeah, absolutely.
Boggins, if you're still in the chat, I want to get your thoughts on Penix to Atlanta. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
No, but what I was going to say is if Alex Forsyth gets to be the center, I mean, that was his center in college. I mean, that would be another thing where there's one less obstacle, or at least getting a rookie comfortable in the pro game from happening. I mean, they both would be essentially rookies at that point. But
yeah, it's a big deal, and I think that I kind of will pat myself on the back in the sense of like the Alex Forsyth idea, because I did tweet out like back in like January of the idea that like, hey, maybe that them just kind of like getting the chance to sit down with Alex Forsyth last year was maybe like an introduction to them, getting the chance to really sit down with Bo Nix and at least be like introduced to him in the beginning, and then sure enough they decided to take him. But I think the other like unofficial confirmation, if you will, that he will be starting, you don't need to look no further than the trade up, right? And I know Gage is very much looking forward to talking about his beloved draft pick of the 2024 NFL draft, but just the trade up of Troy Franklin, like that is the unofficial move for you. That Bo Nix should and will be starting, right? And so I think that. And also, too, I think there's a fair argument to be made for Nix that he might have been maybe the most pro-ready quarterback of the entire bunch, right? I mean, J.J. McCarthy had an argument probably to sit. His ceiling was, rather high according to some. You had Caleb, who's obviously going to be starting right away, but who knows if that environment is going to be, good for him. It may be better than what it was with Fields, but what will that environment be like, right? And then you got Drake May. New England has a lot to do in terms of building around him. And there's stuff, in terms of, they have Jacoby Brissett there, right? So Jacoby Brissett may start, even drafting him third overall. He may start, week one. And so I think that you look at Bo Nix, like he's not only maybe the most pro-ready, but he's going to be the one that's going to be given the most significant action, right? The significant action so far this year. And so his processing is exceptional. I think one of the more underrated aspects to his game is the ball handling. I think that his ball handling in the pocket and not being a fumbling type quarterback, I think is going to go, a long way for this team. I think playmaking in the pocket, aside from and I'm not talking the Russell Wilson stuff, the street ball stuff that we had been seeing last year, but I'm just saying the way that he maneuvers, the way that he actually kind of does it like a young Drew Brees. I remember back when he would kind of like do the fake pump fake, in the pocket a little bit and then create extra opportunities. He loves doing that. And one of my favorite comparisons, I actually texted Gage this like immediately when I was like looking at, Bo Nix, but he reminds me a little bit of like Brock Purdy, the way he is in the pocket. Like he's a little bit more of a mobile version of Brock Purdy. And so it's just like the fact that you can have, pun intended, a true quarterback into that system makes a great deal. Then you add into the fact a wide receiver who is very, very comfortable with, and a very productive wide receiver at that. It will only help the transition for Nix even more, and especially Franklin for that matter. And now you're not just getting Troy Franklin at not just a second round, and not to the Kansas City Chiefs for that matter, which was a nightmare. But you're also, putting him into a situation with his quarterback, with a chip on his shoulder. Like there's a lot, I think, to be said about, just the overall for the Broncos as far as looking into the future, that it really does bode well for them going forward.
And that's what gives me confidence about the Troy Franklin pick a little bit more. I have some issues with Troy Franklin about his game translating to the NFL level.
No.
9 drops at the college level last year, not exactly great. Some issues with his physicality and his route running. I just don't know if he's going to be like a Marvin Mims type who only really got open on go balls last year. I think that the fact that he's got his college quarterback, they're familiar with each other just in terms of where Franklin likes to stop on his routes, where Bo likes to have the ball go, just little stuff like that is going to help a lot with that transition. And it makes me more comfortable than if Troy Franklin were to go to another situation and not have that sort of safety blanket, if you will, in his college quarterback. But I think that there's still some questions to be asked about the Broncos moving up to get Troy Franklin, giving up that first pick in the 5th round, an asset that could have really easily been used on a tight end, a position the Broncos still have yet to address. I have issues with this Troy Franklin pick, but if it pans out, nobody's going to care where he was drafted or who they passed on to get him.
Okay, so shopping. That is the topic Boggins'
All right, so
mother-in-law
if we were
wants
going
to
to
talk
go
about?
shopping for the new replica jersey, what jersey would we be shopping for? And Mario had a question about Knicks's number. Is he at a 1, or is that still the jersey, or is that the jersey as the first pick? And how did Zach Wilson get number 10 as his number the day of the draft or the day before the draft?
That was what was funny about it was
Yeah.
I was thinking as soon as that came out, oh crap, they're not going to take Knicks.
Yeah.
That's his number. They're not going to take him.
His handle is
don't know,
no
man.
Knicks 10. Yeah.
There are only 2 quarterback eligible numbers available right now on the Broncos. And obviously number 10 is way sexier than number 16 is. No offense, Jared Goff. You're the only quarterback I know out there. Aside from No Mistake Jake, of course, that wears number 16. Yeah, man, I think that Zach Wilson obviously chose the more aesthetically appealing number. If I had to guess, Bo Nix will either try to get Zach Wilson to give it up, or he will buy number 1 off Traymon Smith.
I mean, personally, this is just my sheer speculation. Not to dive too much into the training camp battles, I will say that I don't think Zach Wilson makes it out of camp. I think that I mean, again, I think in terms of like preseason and everything, I think he goes into preseason and everything, but I don't think he's on the roster. One of the reasons why is I would much rather have a person who I'm rather comfortable with and have had history with in Jarrett Stidham at Auburn be my backup and someone I can, legitimately trust. And I mean, I like the room overall, and the intrigue has come, training camp. And so I think that for Zach Wilson, I think once he leaves, then he'll get number 10. I think at that point, that's when he'll get number 10. We also know that numbers, change rather frequently. And as Gage alluded to, Traymon Smith is number 1. So the number 1 pick that you saw holding up was just the default number that they hold the jerseys for, to signify first round pick. Obviously they do it for the same thing for a second round pick and et cetera. I mean, I will say though, from the number perspective, I wouldn't mind number 1. It would be very, very incredible to have like a quarterback like with that kind of aura, right? Like that number aura, in terms of taking number 1. So I would not be surprised with it. In fact, I also wouldn't even be surprised if it's say Zach Wilson stays. I wouldn't even be surprised if it's a switch, because Zach Wilson wore 1 before.
Yes.
I wouldn't even be surprised if they do a little switch here and, he wears 10 and then
probably. Yeah, and that's probably what's going to happen, because it's a lot harder for a superstar player to switch numbers, because now with the NFL having you needing to buy back any inventory jerseys of your old number.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't anticipate that happening. I think whatever he gets, he'll settle on.
And I do want to look at the other side of Zach Wilson not being on the team in the regular season. I will say this, like the Broncos gave up draft capital for him. So I think in my mind that they would look dumber for letting him go than letting Stidham go. Plus you gain $5 million by letting Stidham go to the salary cap. That's just looking at the other side of it though.
And that's where I lean towards with it, because yes, there's the history at Auburn with Bo Nix and Jarrett Stidham, but what Bo Nix said in his press conference, they never actually played together. They weren't teammates. They just briefly crossed paths. Yeah. So I think that if you're going to move on from a quarterback here, it's probably going to be Jarrett Stidham with his $5 million cap figure. I don't necessarily think Zach Wilson's going to be your backup, though. I entertained this possibility on Broncos Syndicate today. I do think Zach Wilson makes the team because of the investment you made in him. You're going to probably keep him on the roster this year. Hope he has a Sam Darnold-like development in the preseason, shows out and plays well in the preseason. If by some miracle we get to the playoffs and are able to rest starters in week 17, for example, if Zach Wilson starts that game and plays well in that game, he could leave, parlay that into a contract like Sam Darnold did, and then Denver could be getting a comp pick back for him in 2025. Or they could go down the scenario of re-signing him with a tender and then trading him, or just little stuff like that. I think Zach Wilson gives you more flexibility by keeping him on the roster. I think that if the Broncos were to get rid of Jarrett Stidham, they could bring in a quarterback who has history with not only the Denver Broncos, but also Sean Payton, and that is Trevor Siemian.
Yeah.
Trevor Siemian could come in and be a very competent backup for you. He actually knows Zach Wilson from being on the Jets last year, so there's that relationship dynamic there as well. I think Trevor Siemian would be a perfect fit on a 1-year vet minimum deal, and then you could cut Jarrett Stidham, save a net of about $4 million, and that would give you some flexibility to maybe bring in another offensive lineman, another edge rusher, tight end, any position that you may need. You could still have a competent veteran quarterback that could step in the event that Bo Nix, God forbid, gets hurt, and you wouldn't have to worry about putting Zach Wilson out there right away.
Yeah, and I think that, Boggins makes the point that I think that's my thinking, is that if he makes the roster, I think you're talking about it more from the idea that they would probably be keeping 3 quarterbacks instead of 2. And frankly, I don't think it's the bad idea necessarily. I actually don't even know if Wilson even has practice squad ability. I really don't.
Everybody does.
Everybody. So I mean, like I don't necessarily. It's hard to guess whether you would put Zach Wilson on the practice squad, but I think the reason why I say that is because it's pretty safe to assume that DiNucci's out of here. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if DiNucci is either cut by this week, or as we kind of get closer to the rookie minicamp, I wouldn't be surprised you see maybe some moves happening here and there. But I mean, I don't mind the idea of 3 quarterbacks, especially given maybe what the Broncos had last year in terms of quarterbacks, and especially given with everything in terms of the investment. I wouldn't hate that necessarily idea, but I just think that and even if it was a brief crossing of paths, I like the idea of just to kind of keep the chemistry alive just a little bit in terms of Jarrett Stidham with and Bo Nix. It helps the transition for a young quarterback like that. As far as the stuff with Pittsburgh, it's not happening. The trade of Sutton to Pittsburgh is not happening. It certainly seems like the Broncos, and this actually even goes back to when Mike Liss was on our show a couple weeks ago before the draft. He alluded to the fact that expect Courtland Sutton to stay. And not just Courtland Sutton, but Garrett Bowles as well. So expect that.
One of the questions Boggins asks is about what do you think happens with Drew Sanders now, and that's kind of the perfect segue into our next pick, which was Jonah Ellis, edge out of Utah. We have a lot of options at edge. So the big question is, do we still see Drew Sanders going out to the edge like they said was going to happen, or is he going to stay on the inside? Because we really didn't do much with inside linebacker or middle linebacker in the draft or in free agency.
Yeah, I don't know where Gage is on this, but I will tell you my immediate reaction was, okay, Drew Sanders is going to end up going inside, right? That's my immediate reaction, and I think it's very easy to assume that because you added Ellis in, and you didn't just add Ellis, right? You didn't just add Ellis, but you also added him as a 76th pick, which is a top 100 pick. So you're adding a pretty decent body into that room, to the likes of Jonathan Cooper, Baron Browning, Nick Benito, and then we'll get to the other body in the room, but John Franklin Myers. They added him to the room now. So it seems very likely they're going to do the smart thing, which is, keep him on the inside, keep him at that inside linebacker position, which I think from the overall perspective, if you're going to, we say so often about a joker on the offensive side of the ball. Frankly, I love the idea of using a joker as Drew Sanders on the defensive side of the ball, as like that player that you can truly use as a chess piece on the front seven, And I love that idea a little bit more than necessarily just strictly putting him at the edge and, just letting him, be a little bit more comfortable there. So using his development and using it as a skill set there to develop him there, I feel like is going to be really good for him and his development.
Yep. I will say when it comes to JFM, I think he's more of an interior defensive lineman than an edge guy. I think that the Broncos view him as possibly a D end alongside Zach Allen. Then you obviously have like Malcolm Roach and a bunch of other guys in there as well. And then you have to think about what's going to happen at nose tackle. Is that going to be DJ Jones? Do they bring back Mike Purcell? But when it comes to Drew Sanders in the edge rush room, I think that the most likely scenario is he goes back to the inside. He struggled on the inside last year, but he's going to have to basically have that baptism by fire again, because the Broncos, when you look at their off-ball linebackers, their projected starters are Cody Barton and Alex Singleton. You've got Jonas Griffith behind them, and then you got Justin Sternad. It's going to be interesting to see if Drew Sanders can really entrench himself as that third off-ball linebacker, because they also signed an intriguing undrafted free agent in Alec Mock out of Air Force. That might put someone like Drew Sanders on notice a little bit. If he continues to struggle at off-ball linebacker, I just don't think that there's room for him in the edge rush room, because the edge rush room is loaded right now.
Yeah, and kind of to continue on with the defensive line roster that you were talking about, it does look like it's going to be John Franklin Myers on one side, Zach Allen in one. So then are we setting up a camp battle between DJ Jones and Malcolm Roach? Because they did make that investment in Malcolm Roach.
I mean, maybe our view of DJ Jones as a potential cut wasn't so much, come around free agency, but more about a cap casualty, right? Maybe we're kind of viewing it a little bit wrong in that vein. So I could see that. They did add a lot of bodies on that defensive line, and I'm actually with Gage. I was just more throwing out Myers, just as far as another body that's going to be adding to that, in terms of the rush room. I mean, look at the thing is, like, you look at Myers' numbers, it's absurd the numbers that he's been able to put up at end. I mean, the New York Jets, let's just be frank, did not want to get rid of him. It was a cost measure. It was a cost saving measure for why they got rid of him.
He was a cap casualty.
He basically was a cap casualty in a trade. And so I think that, and he's 27 years old. Like, he's a rather young defensive, prospect that you're at, and a very underrated one at that with the Jets. So you add him to the room. It does make things so much more cohesive now with that defensive line. Maybe they add another body, but it does kind of make you speculate a little bit that maybe DJ Jones is going to be maybe a training camp preseason cap casualty.
That's $10 million off your books. I actually think it might come sooner rather than later. Mm-hmm. You could cut DJ Jones, re-sign Mike Purcell, and you've got some pretty good nose tackle depth between him and Malcolm Roach. So
significant cap savings even on that on deals too.
Yeah. So I think that that's a very, very smart and realistic move for the Broncos that I haven't considered before. I'm actually going to make a video about this. Thank you, Cam.
And Mike Purcell is already actually, he put a tweet out, to asking to be re-signed, like he was suggesting, all right, let's resign, let's get this thing going, Yep. But do you think that we could get anything for DJ Jones, or do you think it's going to be a straight cut?
It seemed like he was going to be a trade, right? There was a lot of rumors and stuff being speculated about him returning back to San Francisco. I think it's going to end up being, to a degree, not to necessarily compare this two situations, but I think maybe to a lesser degree, that may be certainly why maybe teams are less reluctant to trade for Courtland Sutton, because maybe they feel like the Broncos are going to be cutting, Courtland Sutton, because that's a certain thing that we probably want to bring back, is they can cut him. They can, release Courtland Sutton. So I think it's to that degree. I think that, maybe teams are a little bit skeptical to trade for DJ Jones because they know that the Broncos may more than likely actually release DJ Jones. And at that point, it's far more easier for you to actually sign a player to your price, than give up draft capital, whether that's a 7th round pick to what the Jets did, which is like in 2026, or something. But it's far easier for you to sign him to your deal than give up draft capital.
Yeah, so it's teams they're just gonna wait around and see if Denver cuts him, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if he goes back to San Francisco. They wanted him back. It makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I think that actually DJ Jones is a very, very, very strong cut candidate.
Yeah. So we talked about Troy Franklin a little bit earlier. We won't dig back into that hole with Gage. But I do want to stick with defense because our next pick was picked for the secondary, which makes it interesting when it comes to Riley Moss, right? So we were already talking about where Riley Moss fits. Then they bring in Levi Wallace. Then they draft Chris Abrams-Drain out of Missouri, which I think is a fantastic pick. So where does that leave Riley Moss?
I think still on his envisioned role on the outside. My guess for Abrams-Drain in year one is he's going to be the Broncos' starting dime. He's going to play a very significant role for this season. The Broncos utilized dime packages quite a bit last year. Abrams-Drain is a little bit of a smaller body, so I envision him more of a slot guy at the NFL. Obviously, we have our entrenched starting nickel in Jaquan McMillan. There's no questions about that. This is, I think, to fill a very important role on the team, and that is dime. And Abrams-Drain is going to do that phenomenally.
It's a fun thing to look into because I actually did some digging on this. If you go back and you look at Wisconsin's defensive back room in 2022, the room that Jim Leonhard was actually a part of, a lot of his cornerbacks were 5'11" and roughly about 180 pounds. So Chris Abrams-Drain really fits the mold of what Leonhard is really looking for out of those types of corners, which are just very twitchy corners, like almost like a very versatile corner that you could possibly use in the slot or maybe even on the outside. And he's twitchy, as I said. So I think that like for them, I think if you're going to be talking about a player, I mean, he was already on the bubble anyway. It isn't Riley Moss. You're talking about you're probably talking about that maybe necessarily being Damari Mathis on notice. Like that's the pick that you're truly putting Mathis on notice for a pick like that. And I mean, Mathis was already on the block anyway, but you add a player like that who, let's be honest, I mean, you're talking about a guy who maybe, according to some, was a top 10 corner in this class. And see, you add him to that room, and especially with one in even looking into the undrafted free agency pool. Look, I'm don't mean to sound too biased on this, but Jim Leonhard, had really good defensive games against Nebraska, and I mean, like Omar Brown, Quentin Newsome, they played in a 3-3-5 defense, so using their athleticism rather well. And Newsome even falls a little bit too into that twitchy corner, and Omar Brown gives you maybe a little bit more versatility. So it's like, I guarantee you that some of these selections were, Jim Leonhard pounding the table for some of these guys. Drain, Brown, Newsome, I think all these guys were just players that Leonhard truly, truly wanted on his team.
Despite them being from Nebraska. So.
Exactly.
Wow.
Maybe he got a little bit mixed up because we all know that Wisconsin and Nebraska have roughly the same, type of uniforms. Maybe he got a little bit mixed up and he actually thought he was looking at Wisconsin and not Nebraska.
But no, with Drain, I absolutely love the pick, man. He's sticky, he's physical, he's good in zone, he's instinctive, he's smart. Great tackler. I loved his game. I let out a scream for joy when they made that pick. That was one of my guys. I had him in my one and only mock draft, and for a good reason, because he's a damn good football player.
We need to make a clip of that. Just Cage going, ah!
It's probably pretty good too. I haven't seen it, but I remember I reacted pretty animatedly when they made that pick.
All y'all alike.
I think he's talking about Nebraska, Wisconsin.
Okay, I was confused there for a second.
So the Denver invite that Unique had referenced is the Colorado School of Mines quarterback actually was invited to rookie minicamp. So that's pretty cool.
Yep. I've gone up and watched a couple of Mines games. I actually like this kid's game. I think that he's an interesting prospect to, if not dip his toes into the NFL level, maybe he could go to the UFL and showcase what he could do there and maybe carve out a little career for himself in professional football.
Yeah. So going on to the next pick, which switches over to offense, and this was my favorite pick. This dude is a tank.
Yeah.
Audric Estime, the running back out of Notre Dame. Holy crap. Like, pair Javonte Williams with Audric Estime. Wow. Like, that's a lot of power between those two.
He and I look like we have the same trainer.
A little bit of water on that, though.
Yeah.
Well,
I do think this is a pick. I do think this is a pick that puts Javonte Williams on notice a little bit because of his history with the injury and not really being able to bounce back to the level that he was pre-injury last year. Hopefully in his second year back, he'll be able to, but if he doesn't, this is, I feel like, insurance for the Broncos backfield if that doesn't happen.
Well, and that was the first question that was asked when he was drafted was, is this a Javonte replacement?
I think it's more of a Pirine replacement, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's
very possible. Piron can save you $3.5 million if you cut him.
Yeah, I'll be honest. That's kind of where my mind went in terms of, possible cost saving measures is Pirine. But there was at one point, I have to go look at the year, but there was at one point where Sean actually did roll with 4 running backs, right? So it's not out of the realm of possibility that he could be carrying, Jaleel, Estime, Pirine, and Javonte. So I mean, it is not out of the realm.
About Blake Watson,
and of course Blake Watson, right?
That was the one I was gonna remember his name.
So. And Blake Watson was a guy, it's funny. I actually was liking the idea of Antonio Gibson in Denver because he came from Memphis for one, but Watson was a former wide receiver converted to running back. And that was almost the exact same type of deal as Antonio Gibson from Memphis. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So I would not rule out the idea of him, maybe rolling with 4, but yeah, Pirine is exactly the where that I went in the running back room. Estime, I will say though, just the trio of Javonte, Pirine, and Estime, you're talking about a bully running back room. Like, you're already imposing your will running the football. I guarantee you continue to run the football more and more with those 3. You will be like, having a defensive line that is gassed by midway through the third quarter because they're just tired of, tackling those 3 guys.
My question for you, though, Cam, is Jaleel's more of a niche player. I don't necessarily view him completely as the Broncos' full-time receiving back just because of his small stature, and you can't really trust him on third down pass blocking situations. Would we see Javonte sort of step into that Pirine role and we see him more as a receiver out of the backfield, more as a guy who's used in pass protection? Would we see Javonte maybe transition to that role and then Estime would pick up the original Javonte role, if that makes any sense?
I think if anything, if they move on, let's just say they go out with the narrative, they move on from Pirine. I think Estime moves into the Pirine role. And
okay.
And I think as far as I hate to even put this into the ether.
That would be mean.
Every 2-point conversion, just trot those guys out there.
All 3 at the same time.
Just a diamond formation with those 3 running backs in the backfield. Oh my God.
But I hate to even, recommend this or put this into the ether because it is early, but the Blake Watson signing really makes me wonder about Jaleel. Like I really do wonder about Jaleel because I'll be honest. Watson right now may actually be a little bit of a better prospect than what Jaleel was, coming into camp. Now Jaleel has so many flashes. Like he had so many flashes this year with the Broncos where he finds that hole and Peyton loves him, right? Peyton loves him. But like Watson has just enough of that flexibility where you can, put him out wide and you actually can, line him up out of the backfield and be that true, as Boggins put in the chat, be that true scat back necessarily for this team. I mean, he was taken number 2 overall, but the first overall selection that Sean Payton ever took was Reggie Bush. And I think that So maybe he's trying to find a way to maybe get that scat back, and maybe he tries to find maybe some creative ways where he can put Blake Watson on the field.
It was funny. I got a call from my aunt who lives in North Jersey on Sunday, and she had been at church, and they have an opportunity during the service where you can stand up and say something positive that happened to you that week. And this guy stood up and said that he was a football coach, and he had the first player drafted in the NFL the day before, and it was Estime actually, and he was at the draft party and everything like that. So she made a beeline after that, said, my nephew's this fanatical Bronco fan. Tell me all about it. So that was pretty cool. I have a feeling he won whatever everyone else said that day. That guy had the number one as far as I'm concerned.
So we had 2 7th-round picks after Estime was taken in the 5th because we traded out of the 6th when we got John Franklin Myers, right?
That was a 2026 pick, Mike.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, 2026. Okay.
That one was oh God, what did they do? Did they trade? They traded up.
That was to get Troy.
That was for Franklin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Troy.
So in the 7th, we got Devon Vale and Nick Gargiulo. Did I say that right?
Gargiulo, I think.
Gorgonzola.
Gargiulo, Grundle, whatever
Mickey
his name
G.
is. I don't know.
Gorgonzola.
Mick G. We'll just call him Mick G.
Devon Vale, wide receiver out of Utah.
He was drafted under total false pretenses, though, if you think about it, because his photo definitely portrayed a different look than he presently has. So he's got some work to do to get us back to the guy we all fell in love with that choice.
Here's the rule of thumb: if you're an offensive lineman, you have a mullet and you have a porn stash, you don't cut it.
Right, you keep it.
We want offensive linemen with aesthetic, people. We don't want an offensive lineman with a shaved head and no facial hair. We want aesthetic, damn it. That's what we love about the offensive line position.
So Devon Vale, wide receiver out of Utah. Nick G. I'm just gonna go with that. Center out of South Carolina.
Yep. Fun pick. I think if you're looking at it just in terms of camp battles, this one is probably one that puts Wattenberg on notice, right? I mean, Wattenberg was kind of, maybe an odd man out, if you will, even, with the addition of Mustapher, right? Not Mustafar, if you're a Star Wars nerd like me, but Mustapher. But yeah, it would put a guy like a Wattenberg on notice, and but also he's a very versatile guy. Like that is something that Sean Payne has been, really preaching in terms of like, versatility. I mean, he's played center, he's played guard. I mean, he's even played tackle some, right? So, so I think that, it's one that they very clearly do love, is that versatility.
But we're also assuming that Forsyth is going to be the center going forward.
He is.
Do we actually know if it's Forsyth, or is this like we brought in 2 centers to potentially replace the 2 we already had?
They were talking as though, they made references to speaking with him about Bo Nix before, and it just gave the impression that he was the front runner for that position. That relationship obviously plays a huge part.
Yep. And put all the pieces of the puzzle together. In the press conference in January, George Payton said that they view Alex Forsyth as a starter before Bo Nix even came into the equation. So I think
before Lloyd Cushenberry was even gone too, Gabe.
Yeah, before Cushenberry had even left as a free agent. So I think at this point it's pretty safe to say that Alex Forsyth will be the center, because that chemistry and that relationship between your quarterback and your center is huge. The only way I am for pairing a young center with a young quarterback is if they have prior college experience together.
Yeah.
If not, then I want a veteran center to pair with a young quarterback, or a veteran quarterback to play with a young center. Mm-hmm. That's just a relationship dynamic. When you have a young quarterback and a young center, it generally doesn't work. This is the rare exception where it does.
Yeah, and I would even just say, like, to Nick G, or to Nick Gorgonzola or whatever. But I think that for him to, but for him to coming in and start week one, he would have to just blow it out of the water. Like
Finish that sentence, man, quick.
Yeah, and be the starter for week one. But as far as if I'm using Forsyth on this, I really do think Alex is going to be your week one starter. And because I think if you look back at his draft process, there were even a lot of people that were really high on him, like even as a 7th round pick. Like, I mean, even Jeff Schwartz, Kansas City, Chiefs legend Jeff Schwartz really loved Forsyth, coming out of Oregon. So a lot of, and especially too, when you even just boil it down to just simple things, them talking about him, that he's a starter, they even were using him as a soundboard for Bo Nix. That's not something you do for an everyday 7th round draft pick. Like, so they very clearly value his opinion for the idea that Bo Nix is probably even your likely starter as well.
So do you see any of the rookies that were drafted in this draft starting at the beginning of the season?
Aside from Bo Nix?
No, including Bo Nix.
Well, Bo Nix.
Just anybody in general.
Definite, I would say.
Nix will. Abrams Drain will as the dime player. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say Estime will.
Starting, you mean? Like roll out week one?
Yes.
You don't think Ellis at edge?
I think that he'll certainly get that opportunity, but right now I'm probably going to still say it's Browning and Cooper that start week one at edge.
Oh, not Benito?
No, I think Benito's rotational, pure situational pass rusher. Browning and Cooper are your first and second down edge rush guys. Benito's your third down guy.
When I had to step away, did you guys talk about Sanders at all? Like if it looks like that this pick really seals him?
We were just talking about you.
Yeah, we were talking mad shit, Glenn. You know the deal. But
we were talking really bad about Steve Watson. No, I'm kidding.
All right, now that's where I draw the line.
The general consensus is that we think Sanders is going to go back to inside.
Okay, that's what I agree. Now, were there any positions, and I know Gage and I are in complete agreement on this, but the other guys, are there any positions that you think that the Broncos really ignored that in the draft process, not necessarily in the undrafted free agent process?
I was a bit surprised they added another wide receiver in the draft. So, but as far as not adding, I was a bit surprised they didn't go tight end. I will say that I was a bit surprised they didn't go tight end, especially considering it wasn't deep per se, but just some of the nice little developmental tight ends that were there, like guys like Theo, right? Theo Johnson. It was a favorite of mine, right? Theo Johnson, Holker, right? They did go center late. Defensive tackle, I would say, maybe, Toboggans, maybe, as far as, someone in the trenches. But I feel like maybe the Franklin Myers trade kind of alleviated some of that, right? Because it blindsided so much of us. So I think that for me, probably if I'm going to go number one, I would go off of tight end. But it certainly seems like, I think as far as the tight end, thing, it's worth bringing up again that Lucas Kroll showed up at some point, as a significant weapon near the end of, last year. So I would not be remiss if we didn't bring up his name real quick as far as talk about development and him maybe in that room. So them not adding a tight end, at least at this point, shows you they're pretty comfortable of not just Greg Dulcich in that room, but Lucas Kroll as well within that room to possibly even develop him and make him that other guy that can be opposite of Dulcich.
I'm absolutely comfortable and confident with Lucas Kroll. That's not my issue. It's just he's more of a receiving tight end. You need to do it all around tight end, and that's where you had an opportunity in the 4th round to add guys like Ben Sinnott or Theo Johnson, just guys who are more complete players. And at this point, unfortunately, I think there's a good possibility Troutman's going to be your starter, which I don't like. Troutman is awful. I'm sorry, he's just awful, and the fact that he was even brought back was kind of perplexing to me. And the fact that they didn't do more to address starting tight end and you're most likely going to be trotting out Troutman again is ridiculous. I like Kroll and hopefully Dulcich can stay healthy, but those guys are more like big slot receivers, especially Dulcich. That's literally what he was being utilized as before he got injured in training camp of the preseason, was a big slot. He wasn't playing as a tight to the line tight end. That was Troutman. So I don't know, man.
He said he's solid in Madden, so
I think Lucas Kroll is a good player and he'll fill a good role for this team. I just don't think that it's the role that we needed filled in the draft.
Yeah,
I was really hoping Holker would get one of our 7th round picks. I thought that made total sense. And like Cam said, the trade for D-line, was, I think, fit the bill there. But yeah, tight end. I mean, we've been so high on Greg Dulcich for the last 2 years. Yeah. The fact that we're almost just writing him off as almost a non-entity. I mean, if this guy can stay healthy and really produce, I mean, we're just, our expectations can be so much higher.
Yeah.
But we've been fooled twice, that his health is not going to be an issue. And I wish it weren't, and I hope it's not. We'll see what happens. But it'd be interesting where that position lies for sure.
Yeah, to quote Marcus Paxton Lynch Boggins, he's good in Madden. I mean, Greg Dulcich is great in Madden. I mean, he
can't confirm.
Yeah, I mean, he's a weapon, but I think that it's at least worth putting out that this will also be Sean Payton's offense, or I should say Bo Nix's offense now. So the idea of them maybe even using a guy like a Greg Dulcich in space is a little bit more inviting than possibly what they were running this last year. Now, granted, you could say they really needed a tight end weapon last year, right? They needed a tight end weapon last year, and it was a bit underwhelming that Dulcich was injured once again. But the offense that I think that maybe they would love to run with Nix and the offense that I think they could possibly have around him, I think would benefit a guy like maybe not just Lucas Kroll, but especially a guy like Dulcich.
Yeah. So one of the last things I want to talk about, because we constantly talk about what might happen with Justin Simmons. And Gage, you put out a video on Syndicate talking about if there's a possibility that Simmons could come back to the Broncos. And one of the points that you brought up was that the Broncos only have about $3 million left in cap space. And in order to get Justin Simmons, he would, I'm assuming, require more than $3 million. So in order to get him back, you'd have to let some players go. Do you think that would be a possibility that we get Simmons back by letting some players go?
I just want to clarify, that's the projection according to Spot Track after rookie deals are done. It could be more, it could be less, but that's the projection according to Spot Track right now, is that it's going to be about $3 million available, which is not a lot and not enough to re-sign Justin Simmons.
Yeah, and personally, don't expect it to happen. Don't expect Justin Simmons back. The people that I've talked to don't expect it. The multiple people that I've been able to speak to don't expect it. And it's good for both parties. It's sad to say. I think it's good to speculate those kind of things, especially now after the draft. But just expect him to sign, with a contender, either. Now after the draft, or maybe upwards, kind of close to training camp. So I'm pounding the table for Detroit. I would also love to see him in San Francisco, but go chase that ring and go get a playoff berth that you rightfully deserve.
And those were the two teams that I named for most realistic destinations for him. I think Houston, probably not just because they have Jalen Petrie and Jimmy Ward. They have two pretty solid safeties in that room, but Detroit, definitely, they would easily have one of the best secondaries in the league if they brought Justin Simmons in, with all the attention they put into the secondary this offseason. And then when it comes to San Francisco, one of their starting safeties, Talanoa Hufanga, is coming off of a torn ACL, and their other one is a 2023 third-round pick. So Justin Simmons would, again, for both of those teams, step in and maybe be that final piece that they need to get them over the hump.
Yeah. So final thing, what grade would you give the Broncos draft?
Well, we know what grade Gage would give for the Troy Franklin pick. But
F-.
No, I would give it honestly I would give it a C. I would give it a true C.
You Pro Football Focus grade with a C.
It's just like, is there anything lower than F that I can give?
No, that's Devon Vele. No, that one's actually more like a C minus.
What about you, Glenn? What would you rate? What would you grade it?
I'd say a strong B plus, perhaps A minus, and especially if Nix hits.
Yeah,
I mean, then it's going to be the best draft we've had in ages.
I think that in terms of growth, I mean, and again, it's all going to be centering on the quarterback. You said it's all centered on the quarterback. It has the possibility to be, truly an A grade. I think it's very smart to probably put it at a B plus. I think the thing that just really has this at a really strong advantage for it to be a really strong class is the fact that we touched on in the beginning, the fact that Bo Nix is arguably maybe the more pro-ready quarterback out of this entire class. It really bodes well for him, and he's going to an incredibly good situation with Sean Payton. I know people have kind of said some things. I know JT O'Sullivan has, mentioned a bit, how Payton's system is a bit rigorous, at times, like when it comes to, the offense that Payton maybe wants to run. But, when you can fall in love with a quarterback that is willing to do the dirty work and willing to put in those extra hours and truly be the quarterback that you fall in love with and you believe in, that matters for a guy like especially a Sean Payton, who it's pretty clear he's not just going to be a head coach that's going to be here for 1 year or 2 years now. The fact he actually also, it's another takeaway, the fact that he actually went and got Nix also tells you he's here for the long haul. Like, he's also here for the long haul. And so I think that it's going to be a very dominant class. I do believe the best thing that could possibly hit the ground running is the fact that they were able to go out and get Troy Franklin. That is something that I think the Broncos have never really done before, is getting and pairing a wide receiver. The only time I can truly think about it was when the Broncos drafted Paxton Lynch and they went out and they got Mose Frazier as an undrafted free agent to bring him in, right? You were talking about they actually drafted a guy who was maybe his number one target aside from Tez Johnson, his adopted brother. So I think that the fact that they have that just only expedites his ability to just grow into that system. So I'm looking forward to it. I think that they had a lot of pieces, a lot of contributors on that team. So I do firmly give it a B plus.
Yep, I'm right there with you, B plus. The Franklin one and the Vele pick, those two receiver picks kind of tempered it a little bit for me, but you got your potential franchise quarterback. You threw that dart at the board for the first time since 2016, if we even want to count Paxton Lynch as really throwing that dart at the board. You have done the thing that you haven't done for the past 8 years, and that is you've finally given a first-round quarterback a chance to break this curse. That's the most important thing for me. And the fact that they got players that I rated very highly in Jonah Ellis and Chris Abrams-Drain are only the icing on the cake for me. But the Bo Nix is what completely sells this draft class for sure.
Yeah, and I'm going to put it at a B plus as well. I really don't have any complaints in the draft, but I did just think of something else that I wanted to bring up. I hate the fact that the Bills traded with the Chiefs to get Xavier Worthy. I hate it. Hate it.
What's
Why
funny?
let them get better? That sucks.
You know what's funny and stupid at the same time is when you think about the fact that they will now have helped an AFC contender twice in a matter of a month, because they traded Stephon Diggs to the Houston Texans, and then they did this trade with the Kansas City Chiefs, and then the Chiefs took Xavier Worthy.
Well, literally, the Chiefs are the one team you cannot beat. That is the one team. Yeah. Why would you help them?
Right.
It makes literally no sense.
But I'm just.
They have Xavier Worthy and Hollywood Brown on the Chiefs, right?
Yeah.
Why? That's annoying. Why would you do that?
I'm just wondering when Terry Fontenot became the GM of the Buffalo Bills. Mike, I think we do need to bring one other thing up.
Yeah.
Chris Harris Jr. officially announced his retirement today. Just to highlight his career a little bit, 172 games played. I don't like to consider the Chargers time and the Saints time is vintage Chris Harris. I look at the 9 years with the Broncos.
Mhm.
22 interceptions, 4 touchdowns, 4 fumble recoveries. But you look at like 2017 Walter Payton Man of the Year nominee, all-decade team for the 2010s, 3-time All-Pro, a first team and 2 second teams, 4-time Pro Bowler, and the most important stat, Super Bowl 50 champion. Congratulations, Chris. Thanks for all you did as a Bronco, and we'll see you at the Ring of Fame.
Yeah, and there's no Super Bowl 50 win and no fly zone without Chris Harris Jr.
Yeah,
Agreed.
he's such a fun player to talk about because you talk about a just a story about adversity and overcoming everything. He's an undrafted free agent, right? He's an undrafted free agent, and when you want to put yourself into the conversation, at least under the Broncos, as far as being maybe the best undrafted free agent in Broncos history, there's probably some conversation to be had about Chris Harris in that conversation with a guy like Rod Smith. And so, because again, like he didn't just necessarily put himself into Ring of Fame territory, but he put himself into Hall of Fame consideration. I mean, I think him entering the league and becoming a part of that all-decade team and becoming a strong part of that no-fly zone, he really I like how Mario said this on Twitter. Like he really revitalized, if you will, or reevaluated the way that the nickelback is formed, and just the slot back is formed in NFL secondaries. So I think that because then now you're talking about these types of corners as not just necessarily being your third corner, but a true starter in a sense. And so I think that Chris Harris has been that kind of guy. And I love looking at a story from Chris Harris's perspective because to a degree, it is a bit reminiscent to what Champ Bailey had at Washington, which is really funny to look at because when Champ Bailey, now the only thing that's different was Bailey was drafted, right? But Bailey, when he went to Washington, he learned under Darryl Green. He learned under Darryl Green when he was with Washington. And then you come over here to Denver, it was actually Bailey who stepped in to be the Darryl Green mentor for a guy like Chris Harris Jr. And so Chris Harris Jr. ended up really just shining because of that mentorship and what Bailey had been able to teach him over those years and become truly a fan favorite and just a strong member of the all-decade team.
And there was a really cool tweet that Mike Kliss put out today. Then Broncos scout Dave Ziegler, former GM of the Raiders, walked into John Fox's office and said, all right, I got 2 undrafted corners that we could potentially sign. One of them's really fast. The other one's not quite as fast, but he's really heady and smart. Which one do you want? Fox said the smart one. And that is how Chris Harris Jr. became a Denver Bronco. He signed a $2,000 signing bonus with the Broncos and turned into one of the best nickels of all time. And also was very, very good on the boundary as well. I don't think we can let that go without saying he was good as both a boundary corner and a nickel. He was a do-it-all guy. I know his time with Denver kind of ended on sour terms, but and I know there's a lot of younger Broncos fans that are very bitter and resentful towards Chris Harris Jr., but I do strongly believe that there's no Super Bowl 50. There is no Super Bowl 50, and there is no no-fly zone without Chris Harris Jr.
So we say all that to say, Chris, we thank you so much for everything you did with the Broncos. You made it a whole lot of fun, and we wish you the absolute best on whatever comes next for you in your career. So thank you, Chris. It was absolutely amazing watching you play. Appreciate it. And with that, anything else that we need to cover? I think we covered all of it, right?
We did get a chance to talk about the undrafted free agents. We did name drop a few, but
we can save that for another episode.
That's right. We can save that
we
for
have
more.
Plenty.
Mainly, the episode tomorrow is all about undrafted free agents.
That's right.
We have
especially
all
the two Nebraska ones.
If you guys want the lowdown,
May, June, July, and August, so we'll just do one undrafted free agent per episode.
Per episode, yeah.
There we go. If you guys do want the lowdown on the undrafted free agents, though, I did an individual profile for each player that we signed over on Broncos Syndicate. The videos are only a minute or two long. They're very easy to digest. So go over there and check those out. Yep, I am plugging. Damn straight.
Plug it. You got to. And again, congrats to Gage on getting Broncos Syndicate to 3,000 subscribers. That is absolutely incredible. We ask for the same. Not quite 2,000. We're not there yet, but we're pushing for 1,400. So if you could, please, everybody out there watching, head over to the MHRT Network YouTube page, hit that subscribe button, hit that thumbs up. Completely free, completely quick. There's no money that needs to be paid. There's no real commitment. Just hit that subscribe button. We would greatly appreciate it. And with that, we're going to call her quits for the episode today. Make sure you tune in for Sports Nonsense and Whiskey. That's up next, as well as The Neighborhood with myself and the #1 Chargers fan of all time, Bill. We're going to be doing The Neighborhood for the Avalanche. They have the opportunity to take the first round series against the Jets tonight. So make sure you check that out. And check out every other show on the network. We got shows Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then The Neighborhood on game days. Tomorrow is the Wild Wild West, and then mainly Broncos with Cameron Parker. And you're not going to want to miss those episodes. It's going to be fantastic. We love the Broncos. We love Broncos country. We believe, I think, is the thing we're supposed to say now. So we're just going to
Broncos country,
that.
let's ride.
Broncos country, let's mother frickin' go. How about that? We'll do that one.
Fast lane when I pass in the street, bag of money in the passenger seat. Simcoe's been asking for me on the road from the west to the east. Way up, I might never come down, cause the coast's racking up the flame out.